What up, everyone? Just coming into a weekly overview for this coming up week of 2/13. So I'm going to jump right into it. First thing I always do is I like to look at the ER calendar for the week. Some notable names: we have Palantir, Coke, Airbnb, Shop, Roku, DraftKings, etc., DoorDash. There's a couple things I'll be watching. But I think this part for the big week is the econ calendar. We have a lot of data released this week. We have CPI on Tuesday, pre-market, retail sales pre-market. We have some data coming out during the market to be aware of. And Thursday, we have housing permits, jobless claims, manufacturing index, and PPI all coming out pre-market. And then Friday, we have some data coming out as well. So Tuesday through Friday is just a field of data releases. So it's something to keep an eye on, especially CPI and PPI. These are going to be big market movers. So this is what I'm keeping my eye on for those. And then the next thing I always like to do is look at the expected move for the week. So the expected move is 10.44 on SPY. I'm gonna pull up my little calculator. That's a pretty big expected move. So there's expected more volatility this week. SPY and QQ both are at $10 versus last week they're at $7 and $8. It's almost $2 to $3 more. And across the board, everything's more volatile as far as the expected move. So $10 expected move, 2 standard deviation, 90% chance we stay within this for 428 to 387. So that's kind of the areas I'm going to be keeping an eye on. So jumping into the charts, SPY right away. The weekly closed a little inside candle. Same with QQQ and IWM. We have an inside candle for all three of them. Kind of a little bit of indecision, so something I'm keeping an eye on. No surprise with all the data coming out this week. So SPY quickly. Uh, I'm watching this 400 area. It's going to be a key area below 400. We can see 395, 397 area. We have a little trend line forming here. Somebody watching around this 405, 406. Another support spot about right here. And then about this 410, 411, and then potentially up to this 417, 416 area to the 420 where we still have this gap. So there's a couple key areas I'm watching on SPY. Next, we have the Qs. Same on QQQ here. Friday, we closed a little indecision doji candle right at 300 pretty much. So I'm going to be watching support at 295, 296. Down in this 290 area, we push below here. We could see this 285 and down, all the way down to this 280. The resistance areas I'm watching is 302, 303 area is a pretty big resistance up to this 310, 312, pushing up all the way into this 320. So there's a couple of areas I'm watching on QQQ. And IWM. IWM, we finally broke above this 190 area. It's been a pretty big resistance, and we came and tapped this 200, and now we're coming back down to retest. So we're retesting this 190, 187 area, which is a pretty big support now, since it was a pretty big resistance before. If we lose that, we could come down to this 184, 185 down to 180. So there's a couple key areas on the downside I'm watching. To the top side, if we're able to hold above 190, I'm watching 195 up to potentially 200. Now to jump in my weekly watch and some tickers I'm going to keep keeping an eye on, starting with Apple. Apple, we had this little cup, and then now we're coming back and testing. So you could say it's kind of forming a little bit of a bull flag here, and it rejected perfectly off this 157.50 area, which is acting as a pretty big resistance for Apple. And 150 is support. So we broke below 150 quickly, and we pushed right above, forming this little flag. We do have this gap below 148. So if we're able to hold 150. You see it push up into 155, potentially 157.50. If we're able to break this, we can push pretty high. If we're not able to hold the support at 150, 148, we can fill this gap and then come back down to test about 145, down to 142, down to 140. So that's what I'm keeping an eye on for Apple. Next, I have Amazon. Amazon broke down, ended in a doji on Friday, bounced right off this 97 area. This is a pretty key area for Amazon as it's acted as resistance and then now support. And then now coming down, looking in the 1 hour, Amazon The volume's dying here. We're kind of forming a falling wedge, and on the RSI, we have a bullish divergence right at 97, which has been a key support area. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on. If we're able to hold this, we can push above 100, potentially this 105 next to 108, 110 area. If we're not able to hold this 97 and break down, we could see this 93. 93 would be the next support before breaking down, and then this gap at 90. That's what I'm keeping an eye on here. Then we have Tesla. Tesla broke above 200 pretty nicely. And then we had this little abandoned baby candle at this 215 area before rejecting pretty hard and getting back below 200. I think I mentioned this last week. I was watching potential inverse and head and shoulders forming. I think this is still valid. Since we broke above and be watching for support at 190 to 180. We keep breaking down this 167, 165 area would be the right shoulder forming before pushing up again. And then to the top side, we have this 202, 200 areas in key area now, and potentially up to this 215 where we rejected last time. So that's what I'm kind of keeping an eye on here. Microsoft had a pretty good week. We held this 255, and then we broke above and actually created another gap. For key spots I'm watching on Microsoft, we're above 260, so I'm watching 260 as support. If we're not able to hold it, we'll probably fill this gap and then come back down and test this 255. We had a really nice bounce off of, so this is going to be a key area of support. To the top side, 267.50 to 270 is pretty big resistance, up to this 275 area, 277 where we rejected last time. So that's what I'm going to keep an eye on for Microsoft. All right, kind of went out of order. Netflix has been forming this like little rising wedge for a while now. We've had a pretty big breakdown around this 277, 278 area. And then we actually zoom in a little bit. We had a little double top around here around this 370 area, and then breaking down. So this 355 area has been a pretty big level. So we could see us coming back to retest this area before breaking down further. If we do, support is at 340 and then down to 330, or we'll be entering a gap. I do want to note too, as we're pushing down, volume is starting to begin to rise. So I am keeping an eye on that. We want volume support to move if we are going to continue to break down. So we'll be watching. And then next I have NVIDIA. NVIDIA had pushed up to this 230 area and almost filled this full gap. And it's been in place since last April. So had a really nice push out of this weekly inverse head and shoulders. Then we kind of had a nice breakdown. So looking at it on the 4-hour time frame, we have a pretty head and shoulder potentially forming here with a bearish divergence. So I'm watching this 208, 205 area is a big support. If we push back into this 220 area, we could be forming the right shoulder before we break down further. And if we break down, I'll be watching this 208, 200 down to 190. We break above, I'll be watching this 230 area as a potential reject if we come back up to fill this gap. And then lastly, we have Walmart. Walmart was pretty strong this week. We had a little double bottom at this 138 area pretty nicely, and these last couple of days, pretty nice pushes. This is a pretty nice daily candle. We have a little falling wedge forming on the daily. And then on the hourly, it's kind of what I'm keeping an eye on. We have a potential inverse head and shoulders forming right here. We do have this gap that was created on Friday. So if we come back down to fill this gap around this 142, we could see a push up. 145 is a pretty big resistance. So we could see potential inverse head and shoulders or a cup and handle forming right here. And I'd be looking at this 142 support area for potential bounce and breakout of this wedge on the daily. So that's why I'm keeping an eye on this week, especially with all the data being released. It could be a pretty volatile week and a good week for everyone. So thank you. Trade safe.